They bulldozed my dock while my kids were still fishing off it. No warning, no knock, just engines growling and wood splintering like gunshots. I didn't even have time to grab my boots, just stood there barefoot in the mud, watching strangers tear apart the place my daughter caught her first bluegill. I bought this place after my back gave out for good. 15 years in fire rescue, mostly in Leon County, and one too many roof collapses finally did me in. I limped out with a pension, a bag of pain meds, and a head full of noise I didn't know how to shut off. The city felt loud in ways I couldn't handle anymore. Sirens, neighbors screaming at each other, the smell of diesel and burnt plastic that just lingered. So I cashed out what I could, took a breath, and went looking for something quieter. Found it on the edge of a man-made lake a few miles outside Tallahassee. 2.5 acres, some trees, old cypress knees sticking out of the muck like knuckles, and a faded dock that looked like it hadn't seen feet in a decade. There was a one-story house set back from the shore, red tin roof, screened-in porch, couple of sagging steps that I fixed that first weekend. The house didn't have charm, not yet, but it had potential. That word meant something to me. We moved in slow. Me, my wife Marla, our boy Michael, who was 12 back then and thought he was 20, and little June, who was still afraid of ladybugs and wouldn't go near the water without her goggles on. We didn't have much, but the quiet came like a bomb. I fixed things during the day, put up a little workshop out back for side work, boat motors, jet skis, even the occasional busted generator from folks upriver. I wasn't going to get rich, but I wasn't going to answer to anyone either. That part felt good. Marla started teaching at the elementary school up the road. She'd been out of the classroom for a few years raising the kids, but jumped back in like she'd never left. The kids adjusted better than I thought they would. June took to the frogs like they were pets. Michael started fishing with the old guy down the road, Bill, who used to do wildlife management before his knees went bad. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like life was something we were building, not surviving. The dock, though, that became our anchor. I rebuilt it one board at a time, every screw hand driven, every post sunk deep with the help of Ben from next door, who brought beer and stories from his days running a tow company. That dock held birthday candles, fishing poles, wine glasses, tears, lawn chairs, and once a raccoon that got too comfortable. Michael caught his first base off that dock. June painted its railing purple with glitter nail polish and claimed it was for luck. I didn't argue. There was a kind of ritual to our evenings. I'd finish work, hose off, and we'd all wander down to the water, sometimes with food, sometimes with music, sometimes just to sit. The lake would go mirror flat and pick up every last color of the sky. That kind of stillness, you don't know you need it until you've lived without it long enough. We knew we were on the edge of an HOA development. The sign out front said, Lakewood Preserve, a premier lakeside community. Big stone marker, cursive font, little fleur-de-lis under it like we were in the damn French Quarter. But our lot was technically carved out before the HOA formed. We weren't part of the dues, didn't have voting rights, didn't use their tennis courts or community pool, and I liked it that way. Our property line ended right where their rules began. At least that's what I thought. See, I didn't bother going to the meetings, didn't read the newsletters, figured as long as I kept to my land, minded my business, paid my taxes, no one could say squat. And for a while, that was true. I heard the occasional grumbling when I'd bring home a project boat or when I added solar lights along the shoreline. One lady, blonde bob, wine glass always full, left a note in my mailbox once about the aesthetic consistency of my shed's paint color. I ignored it. Then came Meredith Claiborne, HOA president. Moved in a few houses up from the gate. She drove a Lexus the color of old champagne and carried a clipboard like it was surgically attached. I met her once at the gas station. She introduced herself like I was supposed to be impressed. Meredith Claiborne, Lakewood Board president, and asked me if I knew that my dock technically encroached on regulated easement space. I smiled, said I'd been peeing off that dock since before her contractor even broke ground. She didn't laugh. I didn't think much of it at the time. Figured she was just one of those people who need something to control once the kids are grown and the career dries up. But Meredith wasn't content to patrol mailbox heights or nag about grass length. No, she had plans. Big ones. And somewhere in those plans, my little piece of lakefront serenity became a problem she was ready to solve. I just didn't know how far she'd go. Not yet. I found the pink flag in the dirt one morning, stuck just off the slope near the dock, right next to the bald cypress I'd planted when we moved in. At first I thought it was something left over from the county, maybe a utility marker or a surveyor doing lake work. But there weren't any tire tracks, no clipboard-carrying city guys, no notice on the door like they usually leave when they're poking around. Just this little neon flag waving in the breeze with a hand-drawn B1 scrawled in black Sharpie on the side. Didn't feel like nothing, but it also didn't feel like enough to make a fuss, so I pulled it up, tossed it in the trash, and figured that was that. 3 days later, there were 6 more, all lined up in a crooked arc about 20 feet from the water's edge, right along what I'd always considered the middle of my property. This time, they were color-coded, 2 orange, 3 pink, 1 white, and each had a different code written on it. One had a laminated tag zip-tied to the pole, Preliminary Buffer Assessment, LPR Dev. Phase 1. Now that made me stop. I walked the line, bent down, ran my hand over the grass. No soil samples taken, no spray paint, just these little stakes like breadcrumbs. And the thing that got me wasn't even what they said. It was that no one had asked. Not a knock, not a call, not a single neighbor mention. Just poof, flags in my dirt like I was renting from someone who wanted to redecorate. So I drove up to the HOA office. It's a squat building, fake stone facade, stuck between the clubhouse and the pool. Inside, it smells like laminate and Lysol, and the thermostat is set to what I can only describe as corporate meat locker. There's always someone new at the desk. This time, it was a kid who looked fresh out of high school, name tag crooked, eyes glued to his phone. I asked for Meredith. "She's in a meeting," he mumbled without looking up. "I'll wait." He blinked like that wasn't part of the script. It might be a while." I smiled. I got time. 20 minutes passed before Meredith finally emerged from the hallway, flanked by 2 men in polo shirts holding folders. She was in heels, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and she had that smile on, the one I'd seen before, the kind people wear when they're trying not to say what they're really thinking. "Oh," she said, like she'd spotted a possum on the porch. "Mr. Myers, what a surprise." I didn't bother with the pleasantries. "There are survey flags on my land." She blinked. "Then you'll want to take that up with the environmental committee. We've contracted a firm to assess shoreline impact zones as part of the upcoming beautification initiative." "Did that initiative get approved somewhere I missed?" She tilted her head. "It's all outlined in last month's bulletin, page 3, lower half." "You mean the flyer that came wedged between pizza coupons and a pest control ad?" That got me a little twitch at the corner of her mouth. "I'm not part of the HOA, Meredith," I said, keeping my voice calm but solid. "You know that. My lot predates the charter. It was never signed over." "We're aware," she said, in a tone that meant we don't care. "But your property abuts designated community buffer space, which we are obligated to maintain for the safety and enjoyment of all Lakewood residents." "And those little flags? That part of my land you're calling a buffer now? That's where my kids play, where I built my dock, where my daughter planted sunflowers. You don't get to slap a label on it and act like it's yours." Meredith's smile stayed on her lips, but her eyes got sharper. "Caleb, we all want what's best for the community. If you have concerns, I suggest submitting them in writing." That was it. That was her out. She turned, said something to the guys in polos, and disappeared back down the hall like I wasn't worth another second. I stood there a minute, staring at the front desk where the kid was now very interested in a rubber band on his wrist. So I went home. And that night, when the house was quiet and the kids were in bed, I sat on the porch with a beer and watched the wind move through those stupid flags like they were claiming the land on behalf of some empire I never voted for. It wasn't just the flags, not really. It was the message. It was the feeling that something had shifted, like a door had been cracked open, just a little, but wide enough to let something slip in. And I knew right then, whatever this was, whatever Meredith was planning, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I wish I could say the flags were the worst of it. I really do. I wish I could tell you I pulled them up, filed a complaint, and everything went back to normal. That I sipped coffee on the porch while June counted turtles sunning themselves by the reeds and Michael kept breaking fishing lines on catfish too big for his little rod. But no, that was just the prelude, the whisper before the sirens. A few mornings after my chat with Meredith, I walked outside and found a folded note rubber banded to my gate. No envelope, no return address. Just a single sheet printed in bold, notice of non-compliance, structure encroachment, pending review. And underneath, in smaller type, some HOA legalese about unauthorized development on protected common access shoreline. Common access, my dock, my shoreline, my goddamn backyard. Now remember, I'm not even under their jurisdiction. My deed doesn't list HOA easement rights. It's pre-charter, grandfathered in, which means their bylaws should mean as much to me as a Blockbuster membership. So I marched straight back to the HOA office. This time, I didn't wait for Meredith to finish her fake meeting. I walked in and asked the same front desk kid who still looked like he hadn't finished puberty, "Where's your boss?" He didn't even look up. "She's not seeing residents today." I leaned on the desk. "I'm not a resident. I'm the guy whose property you're trespassing on." He blinked twice. "Do you want to make an appointment?" I didn't answer. I just left the letter on the counter and walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. 2 days later, the real fireworks started. I came home from picking up parts in town, and as I pulled into the drive, I noticed tire tracks in the grass. Not mine, not Marla's. Wide, fresh, and too clean cut to be from the neighbor kids. I followed them down toward the dock, heart already picking up pace. Sure enough, someone had been there. I could see the new stakes. This time, they weren't little flag markers. They were full wooden posts with reflective tape and spray-painted numbers. One had a laminated placard that said, Phase 1, Shoreline Stabilization, Authorized Work Zone. And right beside it, a goddamn orange porta-john. That's when it hit me. They weren't just thinking about doing something, and they'd already started. I called Meredith, straight to voicemail. I left a message that was more controlled than it had any right to be, told her this was trespassing and that I expected everything removed by the next day, or I'd involve the sheriff. She didn't call back. Instead, the very next morning, a barge floated in. Yeah, a whole-ass barge, loaded with equipment, pylons, concrete mix, a small crane, and a crew of 4 guys in vests and hard hats who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. One of them waved at me like we were just neighbors borrowing sugar. Another started unloading fencing materials like this was just a Tuesday. I stormed down to the shoreline, barefoot, mud sticking between my toes, and demanded to see their work order. The guy in charge handed me a clipboard with a single sheet stapled to it, some boilerplate contract titled Lakewood Preserve Redevelopment, Parcel E, Parcel E. That's what they were calling my land now. I told the guy, this isn't your site. This is private property. He looked confused, then held up a walkie and mumbled, we're gonna need Meredith down here. Of course, she didn't come, but the work didn't stop either. That week was hell. Not in some big dramatic way, no explosions, no chases, but the kind of slow, suffocating pressure that makes you feel like you're sinking while everyone else's feet are still dry. First, I lost access to the lake. They wrapped yellow caution tape across the base of my dock and bolted a temporary sign onto the railing. Do not enter. Construction zone. Michael came home from school wanting to fish, saw the tape, and asked if we were moving. Then came the noise, hammering, shouting, engines rumbling from sunup to sundown. It spooked the herons, sent the frogs packing. Even the turtles disappeared for a while. And then my client stopped coming. The county boat inspector, who'd been sending referrals my way for months, suddenly pulled them. Said they'd received some complaints and couldn't endorse businesses operating in a disputed development area. Development area. They were rewriting the story while I was still living in it. The final gut punch came when Marla came home with her face pale and her hands shaking. She dropped a letter on the kitchen table. It was from the HOA board, not addressed to me, to her, because the house is in both our names. It read, Please be advised that your spouse's recent behavior toward authorized HOA representatives may be considered a violation of our civility clause. Further incidents may result in fines or restrictions on community resource access. They were threatening her, a public school teacher who's never so much as yelled at a waitress. For my behavior, for defending our home. I read that letter 3 times before I said anything, and when I finally spoke, I looked at Marla and said the one thing I probably should have said weeks earlier. They're trying to bury us. Because that's what it felt like. Every move, every action, every escalation, they were cutting off oxygen, one line at a time. They weren't interested in compromise. This wasn't some zoning confusion or bureaucratic slip-up. This was a slow-motion eviction with a smile on its face and a clipboard in hand. And standing right behind it, in heels and that perfect little bun, was Meredith Claiborne, the woman who thought no one would fight back. First thing I did was try not to lose my damn temper. I mean, really try. Breathe in through the nose kinda try. I didn't want to be that guy, the one on YouTube getting dragged off a town hall stage by deputies while shouting about liberty and property lines. I've seen enough of those videos. Hell, I've judged those guys. But when it's your dock, your wife, your land, it stops being theory real quick. So I went the adult route. I called the county recorder's office, sat on hold listening to tinny jazz while staring out the window at a crew hammering concrete forms into what used to be soft mud where June found tadpoles every spring. The lady I finally spoke to was polite enough. Said the parcel numbers listed in the HOA's permit documents didn't match mine. Said I should have received notice if my land was being included in any redevelopment plan. Well, I didn't, I told her. All I got was a porta-john and a warning letter. She hesitated, then gave me a quiet, tired sigh. Sir, this isn't the first complaint we've had about Lakewood Preserve. That stuck with me. I wrote everything down that night. Printed out my deed, highlighted the legal description, pulled satellite images, dated photographs. Anything I could use to show my lot was separate, untouched by their bylaws. I wrote a formal letter and sent it certified to the HOA office. I even included a little post-it on the front that said, "Would appreciate a conversation before this gets ugly." No response, so I lawyered up. Not some high-powered guy from Miami, just a local woman named Janelle who handled property disputes, mostly fences and water rights. She had a weathered briefcase and glasses that never stayed on the bridge of her nose. I handed her my folder and she flipped through it like a mechanic opening a hood and immediately spotting 3 busted belts. "You've got standing," she said, "but they're counting on you not having resources." She wasn't wrong. Lawsuits cost money. HOA boards? They've got reserves, attorneys on speed dial, friends in city planning. Me? I had a leaky roof, 2 growing kids, and a workshop that hadn't seen a customer in over a week. Still, Janelle drafted a cease and desist, citing easement encroachment, unlawful access to private land, and unapproved environmental alterations. She even CC'd the county compliance office. We mailed it with tracking and a little breath of hope. 2 days later, a fresh notice was tacked to my front fence. Unauthorized structure, shed 2, under review. They were coming after my workshop now, same one I'd used for 4 years, same one that passed inspection when I filed my small business paperwork with the county. Now it was suddenly non-compliant because it was within proximity of planned recreational upgrades. I called the number on the notice, got transferred 3 times, finally landed on a voicemail that wasn't full. I left a message. I kept it civil. I sounded like a man who'd just like to talk things through before everything falls apart. They never called back. So I tried something different. I went door to door. I started with Ben, the tow truck guy who helped me with the dock. He'd heard the noise, seen the construction crews, but figured it was just the HOA being the HOA. When I showed him the letter they sent Marla, his jaw actually clicked shut. "Wait," he said. "They threatened your wife?" Then I went to the retirees on Maple Court, sweet couple named Terrence and Louise who'd lived there since the place was built. Their eyes got wide when I told them about the flags, the trespassing, the way Meredith had just started staking claims like she was playing Monopoly. "She told us it was all volunteer beautification work," Louise said nothing was happening on private land. I met with 7 families that week. Only 1 said they supported the upgrades. The rest? They didn't even know they were happening. They hadn't voted. They hadn't been notified. It was all smoke and mirrors. I called the Department of Environmental Protection next, explained the shoreline development, the lack of permits, the sudden mud clouding up my well. The woman on the line asked if I had photos. I told her I had a whole damn album. She gave me a case number. That felt like something. Not victory, not even traction, but something. A dot on the radar. But the moment I felt even a flicker of hope, the HOA dropped the hammer. A fine, $3,000, for willful obstruction of community projects and unauthorized alterations to common shoreline. They attached photos of my kids sitting on my dock, with red arrows drawn around them like they were suspects in a lineup. That night, I sat at the table with Marla and the kids eating reheated pasta, trying to act like the weight in my chest wasn't there, trying not to snap when the lights flickered for the 3rd time because the construction crew had chewed up something underground again. Michael asked if he was still allowed to fish. June asked if we were going to have to move. And I sat there, trying to answer both without lying. I told them we were going to be okay. I told them I was doing everything I could, that I'd called the right people, said the right words, followed the rules. But in my gut, I could feel it. None of it was working. They were too deep in, too connected, too smug. And I was starting to understand something that made my blood go cold. Meredith didn't want my land for the community. She wanted it because I wouldn't give it up. And that, to someone like her, was unforgivable. It started with a knock at the door. Not loud, not frantic. Just a quiet tap-tap like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they wanted to be there. When I opened it, I expected maybe a delivery or some kid selling coupon books for their school band. But instead, I found one of the crew guys, the younger one with the always too clean boots. I'd seen him a dozen times by now, unloading materials or checking his phone behind the porta-john. He looked nervous, sweaty, despite the evening breeze. He held a manila folder like it was radioactive. "You Caleb Myers?" he asked, even though we both knew he knew the answer. I nodded. "You here to deliver another fine?" He glanced over his shoulder like someone might be watching from the trees. "No, man, I'm not supposed to be here. I could get fired for this." "Then why are you here?" He didn't answer right away. He just shoved the folder into my hands and said, "You didn't get this from me," before turning on his heel and jogging back down the driveway like his shoes had caught fire. I stood there a minute, just holding it. It felt too light to be important, which somehow made it worse. I shut the door, sat down at the kitchen table, and flipped it open. Inside were photocopies. At first glance, it looked like standard work orders. Headers from a company I didn't recognize, Lakeline Environmental Services, and job codes that looked official enough. But then I saw the invoice line. Client, LPR Holdings/Lakewood. Preserve, Mtui HOA-. Phase 1, Shoreline Redevelopment. Still didn't mean much. Until I saw the name at the bottom of the approval signature. Oliver Claiborne. I didn't react right away. The name tickled something in the back of my brain but didn't light the bulb. Then I saw the next sheet, corporate registration info for Lakeline, and there it was again. Owner, Oliver Claiborne. Claiborne, same name as Meredith. I got up and paced the room, said the name out loud a few times like it might jog something loose. Then I remembered that ribbon-cutting photo from the HOA website, Meredith in a hard hat, standing next to a tall, smirking guy with designer sunglasses and a clipboard. The caption had just said, Project Manager, Partner Developer. It hadn't clicked at the time. I ran back to my filing cabinet, dug through my envelope of HOA newsletters I'd been too pissed to shred. Found the one with the beautification initiative spread. There he was. Same face, smiling like a man who's never heard the word consequences. Next to it, a tiny paragraph about the development firm donating resources for the new community dock and lakeside pavilion. No mention of his name, no disclaimer about any relationship to board members. I Googled him, found an old real estate article about a development in Tampa that fizzled out after the contractor defaulted. The name listed was Oliver Claiborne, founder of Claiborne Projects, which had since dissolved. Same guy, same name, same MO. I sat there for a long time, folder still open, everything starting to swim into place like puzzle pieces I hadn't realized were even from the same box. It wasn't just about the dock. It wasn't about shoreline preservation or beautification or any of that brochure fluff. This was a cash grab, a backroom land grab dressed up in neighborhood pride. Meredith was feeding contracts directly to her brother's company under a different name, with HOA funds and zero disclosure. That wasn't just shady, that was illegal. I flipped back to the first invoice. On the bottom, in a faint gray stamp, was a date. It had been filed months before any notices went out, before any flags hit the dirt, before the first barge dropped anchor in my backyard. They'd planned this. Before a single homeowner had even been told, Meredith and her brother had already inked the deals, and based on the signatures, they'd used HOA approval codes that weren't legally binding, at least not without a vote. That's when it really hit me. She'd been counting on silence, on confusion, on people not reading the fine print, on nobody digging, and she almost got away with it. I sat there flipping through those pages again and again, watching it all come together in the worst possible way. The trespassing, the fines, the flag markers, the buffer zone lies, the intimidation of my wife. Every single piece pointed in the same direction. Meredith had used her position to orchestrate a private deal under the guise of public interest. She thought no one would connect the dots because most folks wouldn't even see the dots. But someone had. One of her own crew had seen enough to say, screw it, and they brought it to me. I looked out the window. The construction lights were off for the night. The porta-john sat crooked, its door flapping slightly in the breeze like a mouth trying to confess something. My dock was still wrapped in caution tape, and beyond it, the quiet hum of a generator marked the edge of what used to be peace. But now I had a match, and a pile of dry lies just waiting to catch fire. I didn't sleep that night. I sat out on the porch in an old lawn chair with that folder in my lap, sipping the last of the cheap bourbon from the pantry and listening to the frogs argue down by the reeds like nothing in the world was wrong. Meanwhile, my head was racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smug little smile at the HOA office, that pinched expression like she was doing everyone a favor by existing. Meredith Claiborne didn't just want me gone. She wanted to erase the idea that I'd ever belonged there in the first place. And I'll tell you something I haven't admitted out loud. For a minute there, I really was close to folding, selling, packing up, getting the hell out, taking what pride I had left and starting over somewhere quieter. But not after this. You don't get to steal from folks and call it a favor. You don't get to push people around with fake authority, hide your family's name behind shell companies, and then slap a fine on someone for daring to question it. Number. If she wanted to fight, I was done using kid gloves. I started with Janelle, brought the folder to her the next morning. She spread everything out across her office like a crime scene, eyes scanning fast, fingers tapping on the table like she was solving a Rubik's Cube nobody else could see. "Where'd you get these?" she asked without looking up. "Does it matter?" She gave me a look. "Only if I'm subpoenaed." I didn't answer. She didn't push. She leaned back, glasses perched at the edge of her nose, and said, "They screwed up." "Which part?" "All of it," she said. No vote. No disclosure. They awarded a contract to a family member using HOA funds and tried to claim they had unanimous consent, but they never filed a notice of hearing. That's fraud, not just unethical, actual fraud. So what do we do? She smiled like a mechanic finding a crack in a seized engine. We build a case, slowly, thoroughly, and loudly. Over the next few weeks, I became a different kind of busy. By day, I ran my workshop like nothing had changed, keeping my head down while I installed outboard motors and rewired old generators. But every evening, after dinner, I sat down at the kitchen table with that ugly yellow folder, a notepad, and a highlighter. Janelle coached me through it, taught me how to cross-reference dates, match permit filings with property maps, dig through LLC records. I found 3 shell companies tied back to Claiborne projects, all dissolved within 5 years, all in the red. I started gathering statements, too. Quiet ones, careful ones. I didn't go around shouting from rooftops, just sat with neighbors who'd been lied to, people like Louise and Terrence who'd been promised a community garden, and instead got floodlights aimed at their back fence. I got Ben to write a statement about the day they trespassed. I got a school custodian to confirm Meredith's brother had bragged about a big contract his sister landed. And just when I thought we'd hit a wall, when we needed something airtight, Marla stepped in. She'd been quiet through most of this, holding down the fort, keeping the kids distracted while I buried myself in paperwork. But one night she came home and dropped a USB drive in front of me like it was a live grenade. "What's this?" She shrugged. Meredith's email signature still links to her old teaching blog. Guess what wasn't password protected? I opened it up, half expecting cat photos or recipes. What I found instead was a spreadsheet labeled Projected Revenue, Shoreline Phase 1. And next to the budget lines, notes like reimburse OC privately and hide HOA distribution behind materials invoice. We sat there in silence, just staring at it. Then I looked at her and said, "We have her." Janelle confirmed it the next morning. This changes everything. This proves she knew, that she wasn't just turning a blind eye, she was orchestrating the whole damn thing. Now we had what she called undeniable leverage. But here's the thing, I didn't want revenge. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone's life. I just wanted my dock back, my land, my life. So we laid the plan out simple. First, the evidence went to the state's attorney general office through official complaint channels tied to HOA abuse and misuse of community funds. Janelle had connections there, and we made sure it landed on the right desk. Second, we prepared a public letter signed by residents who were sick of being left in the dark. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us who'd been steamrolled by someone hiding behind rules they made up as they went. Third, and this was the part that made my hands sweat, we requested a full community meeting. Open invite, HOA board included. I wasn't going to show up swinging. I was going to show up ready. Because now, for the first time in months, I had something Meredith didn't. The truth. In writing. Witnessed. Verified. Archived. And I was ready to put it right in front of everyone she thought would never question her. I had the match. Now I had a plan. Next came the fire. The meeting was held in the rec center gym, the one Meredith had proudly rejuvenated a year back with a bunch of overpriced chandeliers and faux marble wall panels that peeled if you looked at them too hard. There were folding chairs in uneven rows, a cheap sound system screeching every time someone tapped the mic, and a refreshment table in the back with store-brand cookies and a pitcher of something pretending to be lemonade. I showed up early. Not first, but early. I wanted to see who'd show, whether folks were still too scared or too tired to care. But then I saw Ben walk in. Then Louise and Terrence. Then the guy from Lot 9 who never spoke to anyone unless he was yelling at squirrels, and even he nodded at me. The place filled up fast. Not packed, but solid. Quiet, restless, expectant. When Meredith finally stepped up to the mic, she looked like a woman who thought she was still winning. Hair perfect, outfit pressed, smile just sharp enough to cut. She opened with her usual good evening and some sweet talk about community progress and the spirit of Lakewood. She sounded like someone accepting an award, not someone about to get publicly gutted. And I waited, let her finish her speech about the upcoming pavilion and necessary shoreline work to protect our property values. Let her go on about how lucky we all are to live in such a vibrant and evolving community. Then I stood, didn't raise my hand, didn't wait for permission, just walked to the front, folder in hand, heart pounding so loud I swear it echoed off the basketball backboards. "Can I speak?" I asked, calm but with a tightness in my jaw I couldn't hide. Meredith looked down at me with this faux confused tilt of the head. "Caleb, this isn't a resident comment session." "It is now," Ben called from the back. Someone clapped. Just one person at first, then another. Meredith's smile twitched. She stepped back. I stepped forward. I didn't yell. I didn't rant. I just told the story. From the first flag marker to the bulldozed dock. From the threats to the fines. From the construction that wasn't approved to the invoices with her brother's name printed clear as day. I showed them the spreadsheet, the email headers, the notes she never thought anyone would see. And I could see the change happening right there, like a fog lifting off the room. People started murmuring. I heard someone whisper, "I knew it." Someone else gasped when I read the part about reimburse OC privately. And Meredith? She didn't say a word. She stood frozen, arms crossed tight across her chest, jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might snap. Then one of the older board members, Frank, I think his name was, the one who always looked half asleep at meetings, he raised his hand, cleared his throat, and asked, "Is this true?" Silence. Then someone else asked, "Did you sign off on this without a vote?" More silence. Until finally she said, "This isn't the appropriate venue for these allegations." But it was too late. You could feel it in the room. The mood had shifted. People weren't looking at her like their fearless leader anymore. They were looking at her like a magician caught with cards up both sleeves. I didn't stick around for the meltdown. I didn't need to, because by the next morning, Janelle called and said the Attorney General's office had officially opened a case file, that they'd requested all HOA financial records for the past 5 years, that they were considering misuse of funds, fraudulent contracts, and possible violations of nonprofit governance laws. And you know what happened the day after that? Construction stopped. Just stopped. No crew. No barge. No generator humming into the night. They yanked the porta-john and left the site taped off like a crime scene, which honestly felt fitting. Then came the emails. First one from the HOA board, suspending all development activity pending legal review. Then one announcing a special emergency session to evaluate the current leadership structure, which in plain English meant they were preparing to throw Meredith under the bus so fast she wouldn't have time to check her lipstick. And through all of it, I just kept doing what I'd always done. Fixed motors, ate dinner with my kids, sat on the porch with Marla, watching the sun go down over a dock that was still standing, beat up, weathered, but mine. HOA didn't go quietly. They sent one last letter, a pathetic little note full of vague threats about continued scrutiny and reputational risk. I framed it, hung it in the workshop next to a photo of June holding a bluegill with both hands and grinning like she caught a sea monster. Because they'd tried to erase us. And instead, we erased them. Not with bulldozers or screaming matches or viral videos, just the truth, and enough grit to drag it all the way into daylight. And I wasn't done. Not yet. The story broke on a Wednesday. I was under the skiff out back, elbow deep in a busted steering line, when Marla came jogging out with her phone in one hand and that look on her face, wide-eyed, half disbelieving, like Christmas morning and the apocalypse just landed at once. "You need to see this," she said, holding it out like it was radioactive. There, front and center on the local news site, Lakewood Preserve HOA under investigation for fraud, nepotism, and unlawful development. Below that, a still shot of Meredith walking into the HOA office with her purse up like a shield, and right under that, a quote from the State Attorney General's office confirming the investigation had expanded to include at least 3 financial entities linked to a known family member of an HOA executive. I read it once, then again, then I laughed. It was an ugly, exhausted kind of laugh, part disbelief, part vindication, part, oh my god, this is really happening. Janelle had warned me something like this might come. We'd done everything by the book, filed our complaints, handed over documentation, gave our statements, but she said once the AG got involved, the press was only a matter of time. And now, here it was. Headlines, quotes, screenshots. By dinner, it was on 2 more local outlets. The word embezzlement got tossed around. Abuse of nonprofit governance. Conflict of interest. I don't even think the reporters fully understood half the legal terms they were using, but it didn't matter. The important part was that the world finally saw what we'd seen the whole damn time. Ben texted me a photo of a flyer someone had stapled to the HOA bulletin board. "Resign, Meredith. You're not fooling anyone anymore." A day later, she did. No apology, no explanation, just a curt resignation email forwarded to the whole neighborhood by the acting secretary who sounded like she was holding back tears and relief in equal measure. Meredith cited personal health concerns and stress. I'd bet a month's pay her lawyer wrote it. What followed was chaos, but the kind of chaos that feels like spring after a long, frozen winter. An emergency meeting was held to restructure board leadership. I was asked, me, the guy they once called a disruption, to serve on the interim oversight committee until they could hold a proper election. I said yes. Not because I wanted power or some seat at the table. I just wanted to make sure this never happened again. We dug through the books. With help from the state, we uncovered a paper trail that stretched back years: bad contracts, forged votes, misappropriated funds. Meredith wasn't the only one with her hands in the pot. There were two others. One resigned quietly. The other tried to fight it, claimed ignorance. The evidence didn't care. Eventually, the AG filed charges. Not just civil, criminal, fraud, falsifying records, misuse of public funds under nonprofit status. They perp-walked her out of her own house. And yeah, I was there. Not to gloat, though I won't lie, there was a tiny bit of that, but because a local reporter wanted a quote from a concerned resident, I told them the truth. I just wanted to fix my dock and be left alone. But you poke a man's family, his land, you better expect he'll push back. And sometimes, if you push him hard enough, he stops playing nice. That quote ran with a photo of me on the porch, arms crossed, dock in the background. The same dock they tried to rip out without so much as a knock on the door. It's still there now, rebuilt with better wood and more nails than strictly necessary, because sometimes spite builds the best support beams. But you know what the real victory was? It wasn't the charges. Wasn't Meredith losing her throne, or the smug look finally wiped off her face? It was when my kids asked if they could fish again. And they did. Right off the end of that dock, lines in the water, laughing and bickering like no time had passed at all. Marla brought out sandwiches. I brought out lemonade. And for the first time in a long while, nothing loomed on the horizon. No flags and no fences, no fake letters or fines or construction crews trying to claim something they didn't earn. Just peace, earned the hard way. But peace all the same.